Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy 24/7 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy 24/7 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy 24/7 podcast.
Welcome to the Real Deal podcast, your home for Commodore stories, brought to you by Anchor Impact, Vanderbilt's official collective, and right here at Vandy 24/7, your home of the Commodores. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., we bring you closer to Vanderbilt's athletes, coaches, leaders, and programs, giving you behind-the-scenes access and connectivity to the black and gold. Subscribe to the Real Deal podcast wherever you listen to your favorite shows. We're available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We have our specific Real Deal podcast below, right there below our feed. So it's right there in with our 24/7 feed. So that's exactly where you can find them. Today on the show, we got a busy one. We sit down with head soccer coach Darren Ambrose, who enters his 11th season with the Commodores. Since arriving to the Music City, coach has done it all. He's the third winningest coach in program history, averaging 11 wins per season. Since 2017, he's captured SEC championships, NCAA tournament appearances, and developed players who've turned pro. This past season, he led the Commodores to a 10-4-7 record and knocked out the number one team in the country, Florida State, on PKs in the NCAA tournament. We are thrilled to welcome Coach Darren Ambrose to the show. Here we go. Coach, I want to start in an interesting direction. I'm sure you've been asked about this before, but born near Sheffield, England, yep. And you played as in the youth programs there of Sheffield United of the English League Championship, and yep. And then you moved to the United States for your college career at Division II school USC Spartanburg. Talk to me about the growing up in England, and obviously soccer is huge there. What kind of started your love for soccer, and then moving to the U.S., the process of that, obviously, that's why you're here at Vanderbilt, the initial decision to move to the U.S. to play collegiately.
Yeah, I think in England as a boy in the 80s that you're surrounded by the game in all aspects, everywhere, at school, on TV. It was like a career that you wanted to aspire to. A lot of people, boys my age, wanted to do that. And my family, my mom's side of the family were Sheffield United fans and had tickets. And it's funny, they took me to games. My aunt took me actually a lot in the 80s with my uncle, my mom's sister and brother. And they took me to Sheffield, and I just got hooked. I'll never forget walking up the stadium steps for the first time and peering over the side and how green things were and how white the lines were. And it blew my mind, and I was hooked. And I made my own way. I actually called Bramall Lane asking if they had a youth team when I was 10 or 11 years old. I actually called them, and they said, yes, there are tryouts, here and here. And my mom and dad had nothing to do with it. In fact, I told them one day I need to go try out for this team, and they took me, and I made it. And I stayed through through I was 15, 16, I think. Coming over here was at the time seemed a natural decision to me. Now I'm not sure I could do it at 18 years old, my older self, but you're like young, you take risks. And, it transpired through a friend, brothers of one of my coaches in England. I was playing on a men's semi-pro team, and his brother was coaching over here, and they needed a goalkeeper. And he was like, yeah, sure, sign me up. I'm ready. And here I am. So you take a leap of faith, and then I think you make the most of it. If you make a decision, and you gotta go with it, right? So you deal with what comes with that. I think sitting here now after 35 years, I've made the most of the opportunities that have been put in front of me.
You began your coaching career at Rhodes as a grad assistant there for both those programs. Then you went up to Connecticut, serve as the men's assistant there under legendary head coach Joe Marone, and then you returned to Rhodes, and then of course you end up at Vanderbilt. Was there something about the South, the state of Tennessee that kind of drew you back? And because obviously you spent a lot of time, whether it's Rhodes and Vanderbilt, and then obviously I saw that. You've got the Tennessee State Soccer Journal. You were published in there. So do you feel like this has become a home for you?
Yeah, in a strange way. It's I feel like a bit of a nomad. My wife and I talk about this, about where are our roots. We spent 15 years in Philadelphia and raised our two daughters there, and we feel our roots are there. However, our first house was in Memphis. And our first real jobs were in Memphis. So have a lot of friends in the state. Coming back to Nashville, realized a lot of those people had moved from Memphis to Nashville for the reasons, the Nashville boom. And Memphis has unfortunately seen a decline. When we were there in the 90s, Memphis was an incredible place to live. I think there was a comfort level for me personally, knowing so much about the state, and I had a great experience here before. Knew Nashville was growing. Had some connections here already. And at the same time, I really didn't want to compromise on the environment. And Vanderbilt offered to me, the Rhodes College, the experience at Penn, being in really high-level elite academic institutions is where I feel I belong. And I spent time at Florida State too. UConn and Florida State were short stops, but they're educational for me. And it allowed me to look at, the big picture of college sports and small schools, big state schools, and elite private schools. And I just felt Vanderbilt kind of matched everything that I really wanted, and was fortunate to make that jump 10 years ago.
Coach, you've done a lot of winning. Won the SEC East in 2019, the SEC regular season title in 2018. A lot of regular season wins as well. With your experience, what is your strategy for developing a culture of success for your program, both on and off the field here during your time at Vanderbilt?
It's really funny because right before I came in here, I was clearing out some things from my office. It's that time of year for us. It's a quiet period of time, and I'm looking at things, and I pulled out one of my drawers had some old stuff in it, and it was a newspaper article by The Hustler in 2015, the week I was hired. And it actually asked me about, in that time, how are you going to create a winning environment? And I said, I think if you can create a competitive culture, and within that establish, at the end of the day, the relationships between the players and players and coaches, the soccer will take care of itself. I think that was literally my answer. And I feel that that's kind of always been my driving force. Is I love team sports. I love the people that I've always come across in team environments. Not all of them as a player when I was younger, but the idea of belonging to something that was bigger than me, that we're all rowing in the same direction. And I think my driving force is putting teams together, and the enjoyable part of this is watching young people grow and challenge themselves and set high bar and set goals for themselves, and then watching them achieve those things is probably one of the most rewarding things that you can do. Is teaching. And it's not teaching necessarily a subject. I think it's, like math. My wife's a phenomenal English teacher. But I think we're teaching about development of self. And that's what actually is most fulfilling to me. And the other bits get filled in, the soccer, the results, that stuff. It's all a byproduct of really the process of discovery of self and relationships.
Well, speaking of success, the 2024 season was memorable, defeating the number one team in the country, Florida State, on PKs, which highlighted segments of SportsCenter, went viral on social media. I can't imagine what that was like for you and your program. Walk us through the excitement you had as a head coach in that moment, and what it did for you and your program. Now that you've had time, I know it ended and with disappointment a few days later. But walk us through that and what that meant for you.
Yeah, it was a full circle moment. And when we saw the draw, and assuming we would get by Lipscomb, who again are a good team, local team, and you look at the draw and you go, okay, Florida State. If you want to be the best, you have to beat the best, and that's something that I think our goal is to win a national championship, and they're a standard. Right? They've done it, and the year before. A lot of respect for Brian and his program, but people didn't know as I started. I worked down there, 1999, 2000. I was an assistant coach. My office was right there, and I went there at a time when Florida State weren't particularly good. They had a losing season the year before, and I went in with Patrick Baker, and a few years later they went to a Final Four themselves, and so began the process of creating the juggernaut that is Florida State. So it was a full circle moment for me personally, but at the same time, there was something about that game that every part of me believed that we could go down there and beat Florida State. As good as they are, and as much respect I have for those players and Brian and his staff, there was something about this particular group that was galvanized from the previous year, and they became a team through the spring. The moment that Woj saved the penalty, it was almost like wow, we did that. We did it, and watching them jump on each other and celebrate and be high-fiving and tears, and it's so fulfilling. Like I said, I know how hard they've worked. I know how some of their relationships have grown and have been challenged. But to see it all come to fruition in that moment was incredibly rewarding. That's what kind of one of the things you live for in this industry, is to see kids excel at the highest possible level. And we just provide the environment that allows that to happen.
Well, fast forward, now we've got the spring schedule right around the corner for you guys. What do you look for from the team in this period with the fall season down the road? What do you look for from the team throughout the spring that best prepares you for the fall?
Yeah, we have a phrase, and I think you see it in the athletic department, and it's we over me. We talk about the fall as being we time, and that is, look, that's team first. Everything is about the team in the fall. It's about tactics. It's about strategy. It's about managing load and player load and legs. Spring is about me time. In other words, that's where we focus on you, the individual. You've got to focus on your development. We're looking for attitude. We're looking for players that want to improve, because this is where they get a lot of individual attention. We identify qualities they need in the role that they want to fill. And we're looking for the growth from the fall, where they may have played a lesser role for some of them, and how have they matured, and how are they able to capitalize on the opportunity now with graduating players gone. There's roles to fill. So we're looking for people that are invested in their own growth, that put in the extra work, that ask the questions, that look at video. From a team perspective, we always say every team starts in January. In August, when the rest of the class comes in, they will complement what we have right now. So whatever the foundation that these guys put together with the coaching staff in terms of standards and reinforcing of playing philosophy and principles, whatever they're prepared to tolerate from each other is what they're going to get in the fall, because they will just allow those new players to either rise to those standards or fall to those standards. So we're looking for the team themselves to continue to develop their own expectations of behaviors on the field and off the field, because that's what's going to carry them into the fall.
All right, last thing from me, Coach. NIL is a part of every program now, even soccer programs. How has NIL changed the recruiting space for you and your program? You've had plenty of players go on to play professionally. Obviously, that has helped you recruit new players. But how important is NIL to you as a head coach, and how has it changed your role?
I think, I'll be honest with you, I mean, part of me is growing with the industry, right? It's something new for all of us. And I've always prided myself on trying to reinvent myself and stay current with things. But I'll be honest with you, the NIL just kind of slapped me upside the head, and it got ahead of me. And I think we're catching up a little bit. But I think we have a product that is attractive for players who do want to develop and get better and potentially go play. There are 10 players now who have either been drafted or are currently playing. The combination of those two things, either in Europe, there are 4 in Europe, and the rest over here in the USL Super League or NWSL. I think we are now recognizing, in order to continue to attract the best and brightest and those who have aspirations to grow into potentially a professional role and professional career, that capitalizing on those opportunities is really important. As I said, I think we've realized now that I wasn't sure how it would impact our sport. 2 years ago, I was a little naive, I think, and I think, talking with in coaches in the athletic department, I know what Clark felt about it. We get to grips with it, and we're a little slow to adapt maybe, but I think we've realized it's going to be critical for future successes. Providing an environment for our athletes to capitalize on all the things they bring to the table and their story and their brand. I think Nashville is a heck of a place to do that. And I feel really, really strongly that we have very quickly caught up and are starting to recognize the opportunities we can provide for athletes moving forwards. But certainly we need to continue to embrace that and put that at front and center of our program. Our goal is to be in a Final Four and to win a national championship ultimately, and to do that, we're going to need to continue to, increase our recruiting efforts even more so than we've done, and using NIL as a part of that attraction, especially into a city like Nashville.
Absolutely. That's Vanderbilt women's soccer coach Darren Ambrose. Darren, really appreciate the time. Good luck this season. Good luck with the spring, and then rolling into the fall. Hopefully it's a big year. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Bill. I really enjoyed it.
That was Vanderbilt women's soccer head coach Darren Ambrose. Great conversation there. Just a great guy, and you can see why he's done so much winning. Just his strategy and his approach has been so consistent over the years. And great season last year, and they're looking forward to another big season this year with a lot of motivation, of course, after getting knocked out of the tournament last year after the big upset over Florida State. But we're not done yet today. Great conversation with Darren Ambrose there. But up next, we sit down with Syndey Watts. Syndey is a sophomore forward. She's received numerous honors in her 2 years with the program. Last year, she was named to the SEC Fall Academic Honor Roll and was All-SEC third team. She played in all 21 games with 20 starts and registered over 1,300 minutes of action. She scored a team high, tying 9 goals with 1 assist for 19 points on the season. More than anything, she's passionate about Vanderbilt and her commitment to the game of soccer. Please welcome Syndey Watts to the show. Syndey, you've got an interesting family background. Your family's been committed to the game of soccer really since you were born. Your parents both played in college. Your dad played professionally. Your sister is currently at Kansas. Tell us about your background in soccer, and I would assume you've been playing ever since you could walk. What does the game of soccer mean to you, and how important is it to you and your family as well?
The game of soccer has meant practically everything to my family and I. As you just mentioned, my parents both played in college. My sister is currently playing in college. She's only 14 months older than me. So soccer has kind of been ingrained into my DNA since I was a kid. I want to say I started playing when I was 2 years old. My dad was once my coach. My mom was my coach in a different sport at one time. So I think my family's very involved in the sports realm, but I know at the end of the day, my parents kind of were hoping that my sister and I would choose the soccer route, which, ultimately ended up working.
And you ultimately ended up picking Vanderbilt in the SEC. When you selected Vanderbilt, what were the factors that you were considering, and why ultimately did you decide to land and play soccer at Nashville?
Yeah. So I was looking at a bunch of different schools. Some were completely not alike to one another at all, which was kind of interesting for me in the recruiting process, just trying to find out as a teenager what I wanted to do with my life. It's not an easy decision. And one main thing for me was just to make sure that I got on campus during all my visits and stuff like that. I wasn't going to commit to a school for 4 years that I had never been to. And I think that was one of the main things that my parents and I kind of really decided on that was important to us. I've always been a small community kind of goer. Since I was a kid, I've always been in private Catholic school. So my community circles have always been slightly smaller. And, some of the colleges I was looking at had 40,000 plus students. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, like that's kind of crazy. And so when I came to Vanderbilt and I just saw and felt just the campus and the vibe, I loved it and I fell in love with it and it felt comfortable to me. I loved the coaching staff, and honestly, the second I stepped foot on campus, I knew I wanted to call it home. So I think that's why Vanderbilt was the best fit for me. It just seemed like it aligned with everything I'd always had and everything I wanted to keep in my life from here on out.
As a freshman, you saw action in 15 matches. It was interesting. Your season debut was actually at Kansas, and then last year, as a sophomore, played in all 21 matches, registered over 1,300 minutes of action. You had a team high tying 9 goals and had 1 assist for 19 points. And then now you're entering your junior year here in 2025. Where do you think your game has grown? Obviously, you still have games to be played, but up to this point, where do you think your game has grown on West End?
I think my game has grown in a bunch of different aspects. All of our coaching staff, they really take spring as an option for us to really hone in on what we want to be better at and what we need to improve on. And before college, I never scored a single header goal, and that's something that I've now had a couple of, which I know that Coach Darren is very proud of, but that is something that we've really focused on since I've been here as a freshman, and something that has really allowed me to create and, scare some other teams and really become a threat on offense in more ways than one. So
you mentioned Coach Darren, and I'm so interested in him and his story entering his 11th year at Vanderbilt. How has he, and obviously the other staff members as well do a great job, but how has Coach Ambrose particularly impacted the growth of your game, and what would you say you've learned from him?
Darren is a massive coach, meaning he loves just to educate us in any way possible, whether that be film, catapult numbers, data. We have a cool little nuanced spreadsheet that we have all of our goals written down on, and the coaches are able to write some stuff in there, maybe how we did at training, how we're doing in the games. And that really gives us a baseline and a way for us to hone in on what we need to work on and how we're consistently getting better at things that we need to work on. And Darren is very open-minded coach, which I love. Anytime I need to go talk to him about something, his door is always open. He's constantly looking at how we're doing as a team and as individuals. And I think he really does truly care about how we all are, because he knows that makes this team that much better.
Well, go back to last year. I know a lot of people remember the upset of number 1 Florida State. It was tied at 3. You guys ended up advancing on PKs 4-3. Tough loss to Penn State, 3-1 to end the season in Tallahassee. But coming into this season, do you feel like you guys can use that as motivation and use that to kind of make you guys excited for the season, especially with all the players you guys have coming back this year?
I absolutely do. Yes, I think we have some key pieces coming back. We've added quite a few key pieces as well. We're only a few weeks into the spring, but we do play our men's club team. And this past week, I think we had an amazing game against them, which a few weeks in, we're 6-7 weeks into the spring season. How far we've come in such a short amount of time with so many new faces is amazing to see. And, having made it to the Sweet 16 my sophomore year, just that feeling and that glory of, making Vanderbilt that national name again was huge for us. And I do think that we know that we can hit that stage again and potentially go even farther. So we're really looking forward to doing that this coming year.
All right, last thing for me. I know you probably don't like to think of it, but everybody's athletic career ends at some point. Soccer will end for you eventually. As you think about your future, how has soccer, your teammates, and the culture at Vanderbilt inspired you to succeed after Vanderbilt? Whether you end up playing after Vanderbilt or not, how do you think this experience will help mold you down the road for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love how you mentioned that soccer ends at some point. I do recognize the honesty with that. And obviously I'd love to play as long as I can, but like you said, it will end at some point. Vanderbilt, obviously, I mean, we're one of the greatest schools in the nation, especially in the SEC. That's my bias there. But besides just the university itself, our coaches and our collectivity within the program, we have a mentorship program where we're actually assigned older players, whether that be the men's team that was discontinued back in the early 2000s or past women alumni. We are able to stay in contact with them and, hear their stories and what they're doing in the workforce now. And I think that makes us really excited to get into whatever we end up doing after our soccer careers are over. So having that outlet and that someone to go to when we don't know what we're doing next is kind of amazing to see, because we know that they've been in our shoes before.
That's Syndey Watts, junior forward on the women's soccer team, looking for a big season here in Nashville with it getting going in the fall. Obviously, they're rolling along with their spring season. Syndey, really appreciate you taking the time. Good luck this season, and hopefully it ends a little bit differently than last year.
Thank you for having me.
That is Syndey Watts, a forward on the women's soccer team. Great conversation. They're looking for even more improvement this year for her. You heard her numbers. I mentioned up there at the top, pretty solid. And so really looking forward to this Vandy women's soccer season. And that'll conclude this week's Real Deal podcast. Apologies for no episode last week, but keep it right here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Next week, we've got a volleyball spotlight with Anders Nelson and then a player as well. And then we'll keep them rolling every week. We'll, after these basketball seasons end, we'll probably reconnect with Coach Byington and a couple of players here and there. Obviously, we've got football coming up with spring ball, so we'll have Clark Lee and a couple of players as well. Baseball here and there. We're going to keep these rolling for you every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Brought to you by Anchor Impact and Vandy 24/7. Tune in next week. As I mentioned, we'll hear from Anders Nelson. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media at Anchor Impact and at Vandy_24/7. Until then, anchor down. NIL. It all counts.